Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with another video. Here are some questions about animals. Animals. Well, you know about animals. Let's talk into a little bit more detail about animals. The cells of most organisms, or the cells of most animals, are organized into higher levels of structure, and you can see the organization right here. We have tissue, organ, and system. If you were to put what is smaller than a tissue, it would be a cell. So animals have all these cells. They are all multicellular organisms. And when you have cells that perform a specific function, you call those cells a tissue. For example, here you have muscle tissue. All those cells go together to form a certain function, to be a muscle, to contract and so on. Now, the higher organization of that, of course, is going to be an organ. And you know we have lots of organs in our body. An organ is a different group of tissues. So you have all these tissues that kind of build themselves up to form like an organ, like the heart. There's a lot of muscle tissue in the heart. It's just kind of the bigger classification of all these cells that perform functions together. Now, probably the broadest of functions are performed by a system. The broadest of functions are performed by a system. Here is the system where you would have like organs, like the circulatory system. The circulatory system has the heart in it, and it has all the blood vessels and the veins and the capillaries and so on. It has that whole system that function is performed. Now, sorry about that. I'll make that an arrow. So cells form tissues, tissues form organs, organs form systems, and the systems make up the body. Let's talk a little bit more about other details of animals. Most animals, pardon me, most animals reproduce sexually. Only a very few of the animals that we know of produce asexually. So almost all of them will produce sexually. Animals are sometimes classified as vertebrates and invertebrates. And I'm sure you have touched upon this in your schooling career. Vertebrates, of course, are those with backbones, and invertebrates are animals without backbones. And kind of an interesting thing, of all species that we know about, well, a large percentage of them happen to be invertebrates. I know we're not invertebrates, but a large percentage of species, 97%, happen to be invertebrates. Another clarification about animals is their symmetry. Some animals have what's called bilateral symmetry. In fact, the most complex of animals have bilateral symmetry. You can see bilateral symmetry is where you can draw a line down the middle of the animal and you have pretty much the same systems on both sides. Here you have four legs on either side. Here you have this big middle body part that's pretty much identical on either side, pinchers on either side. And you know, we're like that. You can see down here a human, you could draw a line right down our nose, and we have pretty much equal things on one side and equal things on another. So we are one of the complex animals that have that. Now, these animals that have bilateral symmetry generally have good mobility. You think of the fastest animals on Earth, they're going to have bilateral symmetry. Most of these animals have a front or a face. You can see here they have kind of a face type area or a front type area which has sensors. And the same thing with humans. I mean, we have a front area which has sensors, the smell, the eyesight, the taste, and so on. I'm getting my mouth confused here, but the smell, the sight, and the taste. And that's going to be true with from tigers all the way down to little beetles here. Now, of course, that means that there are some animals that do not have bilateral symmetry. The next categorization of symmetry is radial. Here's a coral polyp that has radial symmetry. Now, sure, you could have this dividing line here, and it'd be pretty much equal on both sides, but it's true for many dividing lines you can have. Pretty much equal on that side, pretty much equal on either side there. And an animal with radial symmetry is like that. You have several different lines that could divide the animal. Now, animals with radial symmetry all live in water, and they all move slowly, usually by the water itself, by the tides or by the currents. And sure, there are some animals that just don't have any symmetry, and you can kind of see the pattern here. The most advanced animals have bilateral symmetry. The least advanced animals have no symmetry. And you know, these ones like starfish and coral that don't have a bilateral and don't have no symmetry, that have the radial symmetry, well, they're kind of in between, you might say. Let's talk about individual categorizations of animals. First one we're going to talk about is the mollusk. Mollusks are invertebrates, no backbone. They have soft, unsegmented bodies, and they're protected by a hard outer shell. Now, these mollusks, they do have bilateral symmetry. I mean, if you take a look at this here, even the shells on the outside, it has the bilateral symmetry. The same thing with this squid here. You could draw a line right down it, and it has bilateral symmetry. So that does tell you that it's a complex animal. They have hearts, and they have blood, but the blood isn't always in veins. In many cases, the blood just kind of oozes out on top of the organs, and that kind of gives it a life, you might say. We have gastropods, bivalves, and cephalopods. Now, gastropods have either one or no shell. One or no shell. Bivalves have two shells held together by hinges or strong muscles. One shell, two shell held together like an oyster or clam. And we have cephalopods. Cephalopods don't have shells. They have tentacles around a mouth, like an octopus or like a squid. And all of these happen to be in the mollusk category. Another category is anthropods. Anthropods have an exoskeleton, which means the skeleton is on the outside, not on the inside, and segmented body parts. Yes, they do have bilateral symmetry. You could draw a line right down there if it were a better line, and it would have bilateral symmetry. You have crustaceans, like these little lobster and crab type things. You have arachnids, kind of like spiders and scorpions. You have centipedes, like, well, centipede down here. And you have insects, which is probably the most widely known category of arthropod. You have all these insects, which you know a little bit about anyway. These are all the classifications of arthropods. Let's go to another classification of animals. The echinoderms. Echinoderms are invertebrates, no backbones. They do have an internal skeleton. They do have an internal skeleton. So like this starfish here, it does have an internal skeleton. So it's not an exoskeleton on the outside. It does have a soft body. And they have a water vascular system of fluid-filled tubes. So inside this starfish are fluid-filled tubes. All of these echinoderms, every one of them, lived in salt water, and they all have radial symmetry. You know, you could cut in several different lines, this in kind of roughly in two. So all are in salt water, all have radial chemistry. Now we go to the chordates. You may remember us talking about chordata. Chordata literally means backbone. And you can see we are part of the chordates. Now these chordatas or chordates have a nerve cord, and in our case we call it a spinal cord, and that's called a notochord. A notochord is the nerve cord that chordates happen to have. Now we have several different categories of chordates, and we're not going to get to mammals on this video. It'll be another video. But we do have ectotherms and endotherms, and you've heard of these terms just in a different terminology. Ectotherm are cold-blooded animals, like this fish. Fish is cold-blooded. It takes on the temperature of their surroundings. And endotherm, kind of like this otter, is warm-blooded, and of course we're warm-blooded. They keep a stable temperature, of course, despite their surroundings. So fish, of course, are going to be endotherms, or cold-blooded. My bad. Fish are going to be ectotherms, or the cold-blooded, or a cold-blooded animal. Several different kinds of fish. Not going to touch on them too much. Jawless fish, cartilaginous fish, which is just made of cartilage, and the kind we think about most of the bony fish. Of course, we have amphibians here. Amphibians, most spend their adulthood on land, but they return to water to reproduce. Amphibian, you know, literally means can be on land, on water, but most of the time is spent on land and just to return to water to reproduce. Okay, reptiles. An ectothermic vertebrate. These reptiles have a backbone. They have scaly skin. They lay eggs. Most are from the lizard or snake family. And finally, we're going to have the birds. Now, the birds are endothermic. They are warm-blooded. They're endothermic vertebrates, and they have kind of a complex, a lot of complexities to birds, something you might not realize. They have a four-chamber heart like we do. Four-chamber heart, which means that its heart is more able to do lots of strenuous things. And just to anything that is an endotherm in the first place, anything that is a warm-blooded object or warm-blooded animal has to be able to exert more energy and eat more food just to keep up its temperature. The ectotherms don't have to have as much food and don't have to have as much energy at their disposal, because their temperature can rise and fall. They just kind of let it be what it is. That's just the nature of them. But we endotherms, like birds and like mammals, we have to do a little bit more. So we have a four-chambered heart, just something that doesn't have to do with us mammals, but does have to do with birds. Of course, they lay eggs, but most of their bones are nearly hollow. Now, birds have a system of air sacs. The system of air sacs connects to their lungs, so whenever they're flying, exerting all that energy, they have a little bit better respiration just because they have all these air sacs, and that's something humans don't even have. So they are able to get more oxygen. Now, I mentioned that to be an endotherm, you have to eat a lot, and I thought this was a pretty good picture. Birds actually eat about 1/4 of their body weight per day. 1/4 of their body weight per day just to be able to do all the exerting that they do. Now we're going to talk about mammals, what we are, in the next video. So I hope you've learned a little bit about this, touching on all the other animals, and we'll get to digging into what we really are on the next video.